and I'm speaking tonight about the Ben Gurion era to high noon. I hope you can see why already based on the talks we gave. Israel and the Jews in 1957-61, this particular Tekufa, and tonight, which is the third lecture, we're talking about sneaking into an exclusive club, Israel and the Bomb, in 57-61, part 2. So I don't want to do a chazar of what I did last time because that was an hour and a half, and so I'm just going to pick up where I left off, and I hope just about everybody here was then. If not, contact me later. I'll show you how you can access it. This is a story that really does take place between 1957 and 61, does it not? It's a dramatic story, and most people don't think of the time frame. The preliminaries took place in 57, right after the Sinai campaign that I spoke about last week with Shimon Peres and the French government and all that sort of thing. And the remarkable silence of Eisenhower, which I'll get to. During 1958 and 59, the Dimona project, because that's what it was, proceeds uninterrupted. Nobody said boo about it, even though, as I told you, the Americans were watching with the U-2. With the U-2, that is, not the U-2. Right? So this is actually a brilliant achievement on the part of Shimon Peres, because he had to put everything together, and you can just imagine, it's a mini Manhattan Project for a country that was living on a toothpick. They were poor, poor, poor. And how'd they do it? And of course, this guy took care of the money, which we're talking about $60, $70 million in the 1950s when money still was money. And off the books, a classic Jewish operation. It's not supposed to cost the government any money. That was the whole point of Ben Gurion in the cabinet, because people were screaming, you're taking money away from necessary projects. In the end, they did rob from the government because 60 million wasn't enough, but the lion's share of it was put together by guys like Abe Feinberg, who was Mr. Go-To everybody, and he went to Meyerhoff in Baltimore, he went to this guy in San Francisco, went to this guy Brofman in Canada, he went to this guy, he went to Shimshon Feldman in Mexico City. These are names once upon a time of the people that would write checks, that's all. And what's remarkable about it, at least in the first phase, was he's just telling us, give me the check, and don't ask me what it's going for. It's going for something important in Israel. Of course, a Jew being a Jew, he says, oh, it's A-bomb, right? I mean, when you say there's a certain secret project I cannot speak about, that's like telling a Jew what it is. But anyhow, but on the other hand, it did go, and nobody said anything about it. The United States of America, as we saw, is not interfering, even though, as I explained at length last week, Eisenhower, thanks to the overflights, did know all about it, but Louis Strauss, shut him up. That's just a remarkable story. And it's clear that Dwight D. Eisenhower was okay with this happening, even though he never said that to the rest of the federal government. But the idea was, at the time I'm speaking about, and pay close attention to what I'm saying, at that time the rest of the federal government did not know. It was only the U-2 people and the guys at the top, specifically Eisenhower and John Foster Dulles, the Secretary of State, and Allen Dulles, the two brothers, the head of the CIA, those guys, and Strauss, who was the head of the Atomic Energy Commission. This information was literally not shared with other people. And that's a heck of a story in terms of how the federal government works. Now, in France, at this time, the attention of Charles de Gaulle in 58 and 59 is on fixing the French political system and ending the Algerian War, and it's not on the Dimona construction. So de Gaulle is going to have very conflicted feelings about this, which is understandable. And in spite of what I just said, taking advantage of the unique kind of inertia which characterizes large government bureaucracies. So even at the top, he says, I'm not crazy about all these ideas. It doesn't matter, because unless in this kind of a system, a president or a top person, a top executive says, I'm making this a priority and I want to sit on this every day and get somebody who's going to make this happen, it doesn't happen. And so de Gaulle had bigger fish to fry. France in 58, 59, going through the Algeria war crisis, in which de Gaulle was making the unexpected move of giving in to the Arabs. It was a slow process that, he said day one and we're leaving, which was very difficult for the French political system to handle. He also was changing the Fourth Republic into the Fifth Republic, and was making substantial constitutional changes, which, if you know your French history, was a big deal, and therefore he wasn't focusing on Israel. Moreover, from January 59 to February 60, so for a period of 12 months, a very important period, the Minister of Atomic Weapons, the atomic bomb program, the guy in charge of all military and economic matters connected with the A-bomb, is Jacques Cousteau, who is the number one friend of Israel in France. Okay, he was basically him and Shimon Peres hung out together. You understand? He was a famous French person, by the way. He's a poet. He's an important cultural figure. He was a leader of the resistance in World War II, one of the guys that fought against the Nazis in World War II. He's one of the good guys. And for various reasons, he was very pro-Israel, and therefore he knows full well what's going on in Dimona. He's in favor of it. You understand? I might point out that it is during this time that France itself, in 59 and 60, developed their own A-bomb, which they exploded in the Sahara Desert, which belonged to them at that time. They still ruled that whole area of Africa, Morocco, Algeria, those countries south of that. And so the French had a gigantic area, and they blew up. They exploded successfully atomic bomb in the middle of 1960. And so they're kind of focused on that and less on what's happening in the Middle East and Israel in this particular regard. But eventually, Jacques Cousteau falls from power. He's anti-de Gaulle's concessions to the Arabs. He's a right-wing Frenchman on this issue. And then it's not so simple, because Israel lost its patron. And the French foreign minister, Maurice de Morville, is an enemy of Israel, and he succeeds in getting de Gaulle to focus on the Dimona situation. De Morville is a classic French career diplomat from Catholic family, which means in those days anti-Jewish, anti-Israel certainly, okay? From an old aristocratic family. And he is a Frenchman for Frenchmen. You understand? No, I'm interested in my country, the heck with everybody else, which I understand. And so why are we helping Israel get an A-bomb that's going to only cause us trouble? And he is the foreign minister, and he was all during de Gaulle's time. And he says like this, he says, you should be focusing on this among your other issues. This should be a priority. And what a schmo. Here we see the phenomenon of monster-sized governments where often the right hand does not know what the left hand is doing. Just because one government ministry or agency knows about something does not mean that the other parts do. So in France also, the Ministry of Atomic Affairs is handling the contracts of the French companies, of which there are many. The French are getting in on a sweet deal. It's a $50 million set of contracts, which I tell you, $50 million was money once upon a time. And so that's good for the French economy and all that. On the other hand, he says this is going to wreck French policy, especially because Couve de Morville and de Gaulle are interested in beginning a policy, which they did do, which is to reorient France to kiss up to the Arabs, which they do very successfully, I'm sorry to say. And so the French are eventually going to get out of Algeria. It'll take them a little bit of a while, and then they'll get in together with Nasser and all the Arabs. And if you're my age, you'll remember in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the French were great with the Arabs. They gave them all the weapons in the world. And if you're French, you go to Egypt, Syria, Iraq, and all these other countries, and they're doing great. Why should they be on the side of Israel? It's nothing. They gain nothing from it. You understand? It's a certain way of looking at French national interests, and that's what we're seeing the beginning of, even though it didn't reach its full potential. Consequently, this part of the French government knows what's going on, but that part of the French government doesn't know what's going on. Does de Gaulle know what's going on? The biggest guy in the world is at the mercy of the paper pushers, right? I mean, here's a guy, de Gaulle, comes in every day for work, and his secretaries give him memos and papers from various ministries. So it's like the book of Ezra and King Artaxerxes. If you don't put the paper in front of them, they don't know it exists. So it's just important to keep this in mind, because Shimon Peres is maneuvering in the interstices of this bureaucratic process. He literally is in France every week, and he knows exactly who's who and what's what and what papers are going anywhere. And it's a credible story, by the way. He'll get together for lunch with somebody. He says, maybe you can move this paper to the bottom of the pile, and de Gaulle won't get around to thing. It's quite a story. And so, look, all I can tell you is we are not unfamiliar in our modern day with the concept of a large government with computers where the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. How did that happen? How did 9/11? You know what I'm talking about. The FBI knew this much. The CIA knew this much. The drug enforcement people knew this much. Together, do you remember the famous expression, they didn't connect the dots? What does that mean? It means what I'm telling you, that the FBI didn't share its information with the CIA, and the CIA didn't share its information with the FBI. And since they didn't put it together, so they didn't know that these guys were, remember, they had reports that 3 Arabs are taking airplane lessons in Florida. You remember this, right? And they had other things that some guy was talking about blowing up a building, but they didn't connect the dots. That's why they passed the Patriot Act, as they called it, so that to remove the firewall, these are expressions from the 80s and 90s, because there's a permanent and existential tension that exists in our modern society between, on the one hand, the desire not to be governed by Big Brother, and on the other hand, the necessity to fight terrorism, which requires Big Brother. Agreed? We'd all love to be Thomas Jefferson. I mean this, I'm not being funny. And the government should keep its stinking nose out of my business and not know what I'm doing, all the rest of it. On the other hand, we said we got terrorists. And if you really go back to the system of governing of 1795, the bad guys will come in and blow up, poison the water and blow up the buildings. So, what do you do? So consequently, today, whether we like it or not, everybody knows what you're doing. The minute you got a cell phone, they can trace anything, and you send an email and use your credit card and all that kind of business. This is the price we pay. And after the Patriot Act, we kind of saw it's necessary to pay to enable the federal government to connect the dots to stop some guy from doing some terrible thing. But not in the year 2001, and certainly not in 1960. And consequently, you have these funny situations going on. De Gaulle eventually focuses on this. And in 1960 and then in 61, he says, I'm going to have it out with Ben Gurion. And he invites Ben Gurion to Paris, which for Ben Gurion was, woo, big. This is the time when Israel was still a itsy-bitsy country, and they felt they had no international standing, and if any foreign visitor came, it was a big deal. It's not like today. And even today, we still have inferiority complex. But at that time, I remember when the reading of U Nu, the head of Burma, came to Israel in 1954. My goodness, they gave him the triple red carpet treatment because they didn't get an actual head of a government, even though if it's a little fashtunk in Burma, they'll take anything, By the way, there's a famous story that Ben Gurion drove around with U Nu, and he showed him the Karen Kayemet, the Tu B'Shvat, you're planting trees. And he says, we're going to make the desert bloom with a lot of trees. But Burma has the opposite problem, the creeping jungle in there. So he says, get rid of those trees, Next thing you know, you'll have a jungle in your hands. De Gaulle invited Ben Gurion to Paris. For Israel, it's a big deal, even though the point is the whole point of the visit. Here, you can see the visit now. Let's show it to him. Right? Look at it. He's in the Elysee Palace. It doesn't get better than this. He says, the whole point of the visit was to pressure Israel to cancel the entire secret Dimona project. I repeat, to cancel the entire project. De Gaulle said we shouldn't have got involved in this. And this is something Ben Gurion is absolutely determined not to do. And so it's a trip in which, on the one hand, he's thrilled by getting this kind of Hollywood, treatment and all the rest of it. And it doesn't get better than this. The heart of Paris, all the palaces and things like this. And de Gaulle has a famous banquet where he toasts Israel, our friend and ally, which in the Israeli newspapers put in big letters. They can't get it, as if you can really rely on the French. And on the other hand, in the private conversations, de Gaulle said this was not a good idea. It happened under the Fourth Republic, and so on and so forth. And Ben Gurion is, trying to avoid direct confrontations over here, and he does not give in. Okay, he does not give in. Basically, de Gaulle says, "Look, we don't want you to have a bomb." And Ben Gurion says, "I swear to you, there'll be no bomb." He knows he lied. He says, "I swear to you, this is diplomacy, my friends." He says, and listen, I know you're shocked that in French diplomacy they're telling a lie. Such a thing never happens, right? So, no, he says it's all for peaceful purposes and all the rest of it. And when it's all over, Ben Gurion escapes the direct threat. No, so he's able to go through the visit without actually giving in on the project. The French companies will continue to fulfill their contracts, and the project will go forward, and he just made a lot of noise, okay? Now, de Gaulle's not stupid either. And so, let's take a look at the next picture. Yeah, so this is the famous meeting. And they're trying to, de Gaulle's not stupid either. So what he says, okay, I'm glad we cleared us up. And he gives orders to the French bureaucracy to put in monkey wrench bottlenecks and things like this. If you want to, you could work slowdowns. You lost the stuff on the way. There's a million ways of this doing it. But on the other hand, he gives the orders, but this is an incredible story. But Shimon Peres is ahead of him in the French bureaucracy. And anyway, what usually happens in bureaucracy? That's what happened with de Gaulle's orders. So, as it happens with most pieces of paper in any government system. And the bottom line, therefore, is, in spite of all this pressure by the president of France himself, the French companies continued to build until 1969. That's right. Yes. Okay? So the contract, and cash is cash. At least that's what I've heard. That's what I've been told. And Paris won. I mean, it's really a remarkable story. And what it means is that the French, he knew how to play upon the French. Even when France is already angry at Israel and they switch to the Arab side, all the rest of it, the work goes on. Which, by the way, is why Menachem Begin said we better bomb the reactor back in 1981, even though Shimon Peres went to Paris, and he said, the French promised me that's not going to happen. Begin said, I guess, you're telling me the French promise not going to happen? You understand? Now, so again, this brings out the lack of simplicity in relations between modern governments and companies, and all I can say by conclusion of this is that Ben-Gurion and Peres operate in the interstices of the government brilliantly. It's quite a, you can make a good movie or miniseries just on that little episode. In addition, there are some other factors, and one of them is, and here's a Hollywood reenactment of what went on several times, and that is the OAS tried to assassinate de Gaulle. As he was, these are the years of 58, 59, 60, 61, 62. During those years, he was doing a sharp turn in the French policy. He said the French army is going to get out of Algeria. That means that it's leaving in the lurch 2-3 million Frenchmen who live in Algeria. Maybe you don't realize this, but the French had moved several million, what they call pieds noirs, the peasants and middle-class people, into whole areas of Algeria. There was a very large European population, and de Gaulle says, we're stabbing you in the back. This is what France needs to do, and everybody can get out and go back to France, which they did do. The army was so angry that they formed anti-de Gaulle right-wing army groups of famous French heroes, formed a whole kind of hit squads and anti-de Gaulle underground. The most famous was called the OAS. Now, these guys were among the most pro-Israeli of the French officer corps. They're anti-Arab, right? They hate the Algerians for doing terrorism like Israel's going through now with the Intifada. They couldn't take this stuff. They blamed everything on de Gaulle. And therefore, they tell the Israelis with whom they talk, they said, we're going to kill de Gaulle, take over the government, and then we'll wipe out the Arabs and we'll be really friends of Israel. It's happened on a number of occasions. The Israeli ambassador and attaché in Paris finds out about this. He tells Ben-Gurion. Ben-Gurion says, are you crazy? Call de Gaulle and tell him right now, today. And they did. So about 3 occasions, the Mossad saved the life of de Gaulle. Okay? And those are the 3 separate occasions. And he realized that. That's obviously part of the reason he didn't push too heavily on the Dimona project. He's dissatisfied with lack of progress. De Gaulle invites Ben-Gurion to Paris for his second visit. So Ben-Gurion came in 1960, and then he came a second time in 1961, which was really a big deal for Israel because he was running for office in 61. And therefore, one of his big selling points was, I'm Ben-Gurion. Who else gets invited by de Gaulle, Moshe Schlepper, So, and I'm telling you, he demands, once again, an end to the whole project, and he demands that Israel publicly acknowledge that they're building something in Dimona. And Ben-Gurion, in a classic move, says, I totally agree. Now let's leave it to Paris and Couve de Morville to work out the details. Well, and de Gaulle says, okay, because that's what heads of state do. They don't sit down and do it themselves. These are 2 guys in their 70s. And so Paris brilliantly shoots the bull, and he tells the French, for example, there's no uranium to turn into plutonium. We've done it this way and that way. The French do not know that indeed they have no intention of getting uranium from the French, but he stole it from somewhere else. You get it? So he's saying, just build me the thing over here, and nothing bad can possibly happen. I think Argentina, if I remember. The guy was amazing, and he pulled in all the stuff from elsewhere. In other words, the bottom line is nothing happens to block the project, as I just indicated over here. And so it's all I can do is repeat myself. It's a very impressive example or historical case of, what shall I say, bureaucratic obfuscation. All right? Now, just when Israel is deflecting the French attempts to expose and terminate, trouble pops up in Washington, D.C. Okay? Now, Ben-Gurion went to see Eisenhower in 1959.
The White House welcomes the Prime Minister of Israel for the first of his series of talks with Western leaders. David Ben-Gurion is stopping in Washington, New York, and chief European capitals to get an estimate of the political atmosphere as the summit conference approaches. He meets for 2 hours with President Eisenhower. Undersecretary of State Douglas Dillon is also seen with the two leaders. The 73-year-old Prime Minister is reported undisturbed by Arab protests against his visit and picketing by Arab students here. This is a peaceful country, he says. He is cordially received.
Isn't it sad in those days, you have the CNN. The CNN would not be in there. They'd be outside talking to the Arab protesters now. I mean that. You understand? This is the good old black and white old days in which they say Ben-Gurion says it's a peaceful country. There are Arabs out there and Chabzei and Bud. It's a different media environment, unfortunately. Anyhow, the point is they have a 2-hour conversation, and later on another one. Ben-Gurion monopolized the whole conversation by doing like Begin. Let me tell you about the history of the Jewish people. You understand? I'm serious. I won't tell you what Eisenhower said, but he compared it to some of his medical treatments that he was undergoing at the time. But I'll go into. He had a lot of GI issues, if you know Eisenhower. This is true. Anyhow, what the heck? I'll say it. He says talking to Ben-Gurion is worse than a barium enema. That's what he said. So there was no love lost over here. There's no love lost over here on this sort of thing. But on the other hand, he doesn't bother about the Mona. That's not an issue. So in other words, I see nothing, I don't know, it's quite interesting. In 1958 and 59, knowledge of the Mona was restricted, as I told you, to a very small circle who did not disseminate this information throughout the federal government. The president then passes on to the State Department, to the other thing. The head of the CIA didn't tell the CIA. The head of the AEC, the Atomic Energy Commission, didn't tell the Atomic Energy Commission. I mean, it's really quite a story. This guy Strauss, he got everybody in. It's just a remarkable story. And in other words, it is what it is. This blissful ignorance continues for 2 years, 58, 59, which is when in Israel they're actually doing the construction on the ground, correct? This is when they open the hole, they dig, and they pour in the cement. I mean, just think of 2 years of uninterrupted construction. That's a key. It wouldn't have happened if they didn't have this 2-year break. However, in the middle of the year 1960, as a result of de Gaulle's flaps, he's calling Ben-Gurion in, he's already hinting like, I don't know what's going on in the Negev and all this kind of stuff. The United States Intelligence community starts to notice. Now you understand, we have people in the audience here who work for them. There's such a thing called the NSA, the CIA, the this, the that, and the other, which are bureaucracies. And they have their own collection systems, their own systems of analysis. It's a whole bureaucratic kind of system. That is how a government works. You understand? And they have, if you're the United States, you have a real system in which, are you hearing third-hand information, first-hand information? Is the information reliable? Can you cross-check it? You don't tell the President of the United States or the government, we know this for sure, until you have a certain amount of vados over here, until you have a certain amount of evidence. And so it's not so simple that because Eisenhower didn't say anything, the intelligence community was not aware of what's happening in Dimona, but now they're starting, it's still 3 years late, now they're starting to notice what's going on over here. Now, in addition, by 1960, which is the last year of Eisenhower, he left office in January 61. In 1960, you have a new cast of, it's late in the day, you have a new cast of characters in the high position in Washington. John Foster Dulles died of cancer and was replaced by Christian Herter, who had been a governor of Massachusetts. And what he called Strauss, Louis Strauss, his term was up, so he wasn't the head of the Atomic Energy Commission. Instead, it went to John McCone. Now, these are two guys, they're patriotic Americans. John McCone was a famous bureaucrat, I guess you'd say, a very successful industrialist and all this. He had very high positions under many administrations. But they're regular guys. They're not soft on Israel. They're not like Eisenhower, not like Truman or something. They didn't feel, Israel. I want you to understand, the position of Israel was, we're all in favor of nuclear non-proliferation. We just want an exception for us. And I do mean that. And the attitude of somebody like Eisenhower or the others was, we're totally against any country getting an atomic bomb. Israel's different. because it is a situation that I discussed last week, which is not really so defensible in a public forum, and it's just something you have to either subscribe to or not subscribe to behind doors. The United States intelligence community, people like Secretary of State Herter, the new guy, and people like the Atomic Energy Commission over here, they don't know the special rules for Israel. There's a rule for everybody. The United States doesn't want, it's a sound policy. It doesn't want any other country to get atomic bomb. It's bad enough that America, Russia, and England have it. That's all they had at that time. And France was about to get it, so they said, well, you can't stop France. And I think they also knew sooner or later China will get it, you can't stop China. But that's it, okay? Because otherwise, every stupid little country, imagine Saddam Hussein will have a bomb, and Nasser will have a bomb, and the Congo will have a bomb. You know, it'd be crazy, you understand? So you hear the logic over here. By this time, the project has proceeded pretty publicly. Let's put it this way. Take a look at this. I mean, what is this? You know what I'm saying? It's not your typical, I don't know exactly how you hide it. It's not your typical building in the Negev. You understand what I'm saying? Yeah, so Ben Gurion, who wasn't religious, so Ben Gurion said like this, it's a textile factory. I'm serious. So Kitan, you know, Israel announced that they opened a textile factory. Let's go back. Let's look at the textile factory here for a second. Yeah, you know, this is obviously where the guy announces the sale prices or something like that. So it got a little bit hard to hide that something strange is going on over here. Between June of 1960 and November of 1960, little by little, the United States intelligence community starts to connect the dots, even though there is no smoking gun. The NSA gets on it, the CIA gets on it, the military attachés at the American embassy in Tel Aviv start to get instructions, why don't you take a picnic in Dimona? No, I'm serious, you know, and do this sort of thing and that sort of thing, right? By the way, the Russians were very clever. They asked for a tour. I remember the Russian guy, he says, I want to tour Israel. So you can tour, and Israel is so stupid at that time. You can tour everywhere except Dimona. like Shalom Aleichem, you know, Chabad. Anyway, little by little, people start to get over here. In November of 1960, the news really started to break. Now, I want to make something very clear over here. Ben Gurion, Israel, very conflicted about how to deal with the United States, because America is treating them better than anybody else, even Eisenhower, far better than anyone else. America is saying, we trust you. It's very bad if Israel really, mamish, cheats on them totally. You get what I'm saying? There could be very bad consequences. They didn't want to completely and totally lie to them, but they couldn't tell the truth either. And so what they were trying to do what Strauss did, which was, there's something significant acting in Dimona, don't ask us what, you know, something along those lines. But the environment in Washington, D.C. was changing. And so an American Jewish scientist, a guy named Henry Gumberg at the University of Michigan, a fairly well-known person, once upon a time, physicist, went to Israel, as they, you know, as a lot of scientists do, go visit Israel. And he's an American guy, and he is holding in physics. That's what he is. And he, after talking to people at the Weizmann Institute, and to this place and that place, and looking at their curricula that they're doing in the universities, and how many people are going to physics as opposed to something else, he starts to connect the dots. You understand? He says, you know, officially, Israel is only interested in atomic energy for peaceful purposes, and that they purchased from the United States a certain, let's call it a peaceful reactor for atomic energy study in Nachal Sorek. Now, there's only so and so many scientists you need for that, and there's so and so much resources you put into something like that. But what Israel's turning out in their universities, in their physics department, way exceeds that. You understand? And so as a physicist, he understood it. And you know how it goes when you talk shop with others, you can't really hide everything so well. And so they say, you know, this and this for the project. What project? Well, you know, the project that we can't talk about. I'm simply saying that what he does is, now he's an American. He's Jewish, and he was sympathetic enough to go to Israel, but he's an American. In other words, let's put it this way. He's the opposite of Jonathan Pollard. He doesn't want to do anything like that. To 180 degrees opposite. So he goes to the United States ambassador in Tel Aviv, Ogdenreich, who was, as you can see, a young fellow from a very socially prominent New York family, and that Eisenhower made him an ambassador to Israel, and very popular in Israel too. And he said, there is stuff going on over here in Dimona. You guys don't know about it. And Ogden Wright said like this, don't say a word. Get on the airplane, go to Paris. I'll have them ready for you and debrief you. I'll give him the whole business. And that's what he does. He doesn't say a word. He goes to Paris, and there he speaks to the United States Embassy and whoever, the scientific people, and the CIA and all the rest. He gives them a full report, and he says, get used to this. Israel is getting an A-bomb in Dimona. Right? This is how it came out, the Gomberg report. And he's a Jewish guy. But the timing is always so interesting. This is all happening 2 weeks after the election of 1960, when Kennedy was elected. So when it happens, literally the Eisenhower administration is a lame duck, big time. They're getting ready to leave Eisenhower after 8 years. And if anything, the president's attention was totally focused on his, his image message, his final legacy, his famous speech that he gives in Farewell to America.
Emergency improvisation of national defense. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. Added to this, 3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment. We annually spend on military security alone more than the net income of all United States corporations. Now, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic.
Isn't it interesting that he doesn't talk down to people? It's a different America. This is not how a politician speaks today. You understand that? Anyway, in spite of the fact that they're literally on the way out, and the president has obviously had his mind elsewhere, John McCone, the head of the Atomic Energy Commission, accuses Israel, meet the press, of doing suspicious things in Dimona. Now, McCone is a passionate, unlike Strauss, is not Jewish, he's not pro-Israel, secretly or otherwise, and he's also passionately against nuclear proliferation. And he's really ticked off that Israel is cheating. And so he goes public with this. Secretary Herter, Christian Herter, impresses the Israeli ambassador, and he said, what's going on, tell us. He gives him 5 questions, tell me what's going on. And Ogden Rod goes and presses Ben-Gurion directly in an interview. And, Ben-Gurion's not stupid. He said, this guy's going to be out of office in 6 or 8 weeks, so he fumfus and schmumfus, right? I mean, the Eisenhower administration are lame ducks. But it's not as simple as that, because the Eisenhower administration is going to hand over this particular ball or this particular hot potato to the new guys, okay? This is what Israel has to deal with after January of 1961. So here we have what we call Parshas John F. Kennedy. Very complex as far as Kennedy and the Jews are concerned. You start, of course, with the beginning. That's right. John F. Kennedy's father wasn't exactly a lover of Jews. He could call him a couple other names, but he wasn't exactly a lover of Jews. And I want to tell you something. He was not beloved by the whole country either. Take a look at this. Okay. Now the truth is, to be historically accurate, old man Kennedy's portrayed actually worse than he really was, but that doesn't matter for our purposes. John F. Kennedy knew from a young age he's going to have trouble with the Jewish vote. And he decided to be a liberal Democrat. That was the road he took. Now, old man Kennedy was not a liberal Democrat, but John F. Kennedy was a liberal Democrat. After all, when the war's over, old man Kennedy said to him, he says, you want to be any success now, between the different groups in the Democratic Party, you got to go liberal. And if you want to get high office. Kennedy was no particular lover of Jews. I'm talking about John F. Kennedy. And he realized that he had this image. Now, when he first ran, he was a congressman from an all-Irish district, no Jews at all in Boston. So he didn't have to worry about this kind of stuff. But he realized as time went on, one day he wants to run for Senate, one day for president, and therefore you have to expand into, for example, you want to be Senate, you got to go for whole Massachusetts. Massachusetts, and there's a lot of Jews, as you know, a lot more Jews in Boston, for example, than there are in Baltimore. So what are you going to do about this? He relied on people like John McCormick, who later, I don't know if you remember him, he was later the Speaker of the House. John McCormick was an Irish politician of the old school. He was there for 100 years, a real stark Irish Catholic. And I'll tell you something, the two guys don't belong together in the same thing. John McCormick was married for I remember when he died, he married for 70 years, and he and his wife were never away for a day. They were never away for a night. You understand? Now, John F. Kennedy, on the other hand, and John McCormick was the majority leader for many years under Roosevelt, FDR. He was a majority leader in the House of Representatives. And later became, he was number 2 to Sam Rayburn, and later on when Rayburn died, he became the Speaker. So it was a big deal. And he was a congressman from a Jewish district, from Brookline, right? And John McCormick was more frum than the Pope, you know? He was very pro-Jewish because he was that kind of old school congressman, and he went to all the bar mitzvahs and this and that and the other. No, listen, you just look at him, you know, he's Irish, but that's got nothing to do with anything. I'll just tell you one example that I'm talking about, and that is, in the 50s, there were many moves, for certain reasons, on the part of the SPCA to kill Shechita. Right, it happened to be in 1952, and 54, and 57. There just were a lot of moves at that time that the SPCA was out to ban the Shechita. And the federal government really was pressing on all this. All the big rabbis and people like that, Rabbi Salvation, he was the guy they went to. You know, so he said, you know, to bury it or take it out of committee or do all these kinds of things. And it wasn't easy even then. And there were times when even he was not able to stop it. And finally, in the late 50s, Humphrey and him put together a bill which is still there in the law today, which says like this, and you listen closely to what I'm saying, all forms of inhuman killing of animals is prohibited under federal law except for Shechita. Right? And you know, the rabbis didn't like the way it was formed and all this kind of stuff. And John McCormick and Humphrey's like, just shut up and take it because this will make it go away. Now today with the Muslim, I'm nothing to worry about. Nobody's ever going to bring this up again, right? I'm serious. You know, nobody's ever going to bring that up again. But at that time, it was a big deal. And John McCormick was number 1 on Israel. Get it? I mean, in 1948, 49, 50, 51, those early, very important years, the two guys from Massachusetts, you'll see in a second, the leading Democrat and the leading Republican, John McCormick and Joe Martin, were the main guys in Israel. When I say on Israel, I mean to get him $100 million in 48, to get him $147 million in 49, to get him $78 million in 1950. This is what Israel lived on. Okay? This is when they had the Ma'abara and all the people coming in. People forget. The American Jewish money wasn't that big in those days. Don't believe it for a second. When it was the 48 war, so in 47, 48, people gave a grand total of 100 million, 50 million in 47, 50 million in 48. And that's a lot of money. I'm not taking it away. But when 49 came around, the American Jews, it dropped down to like 33 million, 36 million. Wasn't any kind of money at all without the government, without the money from Truman, right? And it wasn't Truman, to be perfectly honest. It was guys like this. And they didn't have an AIPAC at that time, just before AIPAC really existed. And so really the pro-Jewish, pro-Israeli forces, the Israeli embassy, relied on a few guys at the right place at the right time. And John McCormick was the main one of this. Okay, I'm just sharing that with you. If you care to read up on this, you'll be interested. He flew to Israel in 49, he flew to Israel in 50. It's quite a story. Now here's JFK. He wants to run now in 1952 for the Senate, okay, against Henry Cabot Lodge, who was a popular senator. And Henry Cabot Lodge said the right things about Israel, so he's fairly popular. And here's this guy, John F. Kennedy, the son of Joe Kennedy. You understand? And so, first of all, he runs to Israel. He has a meeting with Ben Gurion, like he's really, you can see how bored he is, you know. And so is this guy who is the son of FDR. Both of them were congressmen who thought they'd have a political career. Kennedy ended up with a political career. Roosevelt's son didn't. He was just a congressman for a few years. But, you know, they're running over to Israel. And more importantly, when the 52 election comes, so Joe Kennedy very smartly leaves the country. Rose Kennedy, the mother, joins Hadassah. I kid you not. I'm kidding you not. She raised a ton of money, for the Hadassah thing. They heard Eunice Shriver also goes and joins, I don't know, the Magen Dovid Adom in this kind of business. You do what you got to do. And it didn't work. The Boston Jews didn't like this young Kennedy guy until they had this big meeting, and he brought John McCormick in. It's a classic story. And John McCormick just lied, and he said, I want to tell you something. I was in Congress, and we had that bill for Israel for $100 million, and it was going nowhere, and it wasn't, it was not going to be passed. And I looked around and said, who can I rely on to get the effort out there and push it over? And I saw this young ex-war hero, John F. Kennedy, and he's the one behind the scenes who helped me get the money for Israel. And, you can thank him all the rest. It's a big lie. You understand? But it worked. Not for the first or the last time. And the result is that Kennedy did win the election in Massachusetts in '52, which is, quite a business. But he realized already at that time he had to get on the right side of the Israel issue for political purposes. Here's the leader of the Republican Party in the Congress, who is also a Boston, he wasn't in Boston, he was somewhere else in Massachusetts, Joseph Martin, who was for decades he was the Speaker of the House also when the Republicans won. In other words, in 1947 and 48, and later in 1953 and 54, when the Republicans controlled the House, which was rare, he was the Speaker of the House. And you can see, he was in Israel every 10 minutes, okay? So I don't make fun of people like this because we need our friends. We don't have enough of them. Now, Kennedy, as the 50s went by, got closer and closer to running for president, even though he was very young. And so he swallowed the prune juice. He says, even kisses up to Abigail Silver, as you see in the picture over here, and makes this big speech for the ZOA. I love Israel. We can't survive without Israel. Israel, Israel, Israel. And it works. When I say it works, I mean eventually about 85% of the Jewish community voted for Kennedy in '60, which is quite a story for somebody who's the son of Joe Kennedy. Now, Rabbi Hertzberg did not. He said like Truman, He said, no way. But most Jews did, as some of us will perhaps remember. Now, Kennedy knew that he's the father's son, and therefore the Jews are always going to be suspicious of him. So already in the 50s, he said, what I have to do is be public to show I'm not anti-Semitic, and so he hired a prominent Jewish lawyer, Mike Feldman from Philadelphia. And a Philadelphia Jew guy, I think he went to Harvard Law School or something like that. And he said, you'll be on my personal staff, and he was on his personal staff, and you handled the Jewish issues, plus other issues as well. This guy was just not just some schnook. I mean, he was a big lawyer, and later on afterwards he had a life as a very successful Washington attorney and lobbyist in later years, so he was a big deal. And also, when the 60 comes and they have the big election that Kennedy's running for, so it's always funny to me, but let's put it this way. Did anybody here send money to Obama? Did anybody here send money to Romney? Did anybody send money to these other people? They're richer than you. You understand? But nevertheless, we have fools in the United States, and since it's legal to send them money, so even though, imagine a guy like me will send money, to a multimillionaire that he should run for office. You spend your own money. No, that you don't do, right? The best, of course, in my mind is answer the following question. Were there people who send money online for the presidential campaign of Forbes? The answer is yes. He raised like $35 million. Okay. Okay. So Kennedy ran for office, but didn't want to spend his money. And so how do you get the money? Once you start talking about running for campaigns of money, you end up with this guy. Now, there's Truman, but there's Abe Feinberg in the background. Because if you're a real lobbyist, all the rest of you don't want to be in the foreground. I'm serious about that. We have people here who knew him. They spoke about it the other day. And Abe Feinberg was the best kind of lobbyist, or whatever you want to call it, money guy, because he really did it for Klal Yisrael. I mean, that's the truth. He did get his brother a federal judgeship, which I know is unheard of in Baltimore. But the fact is, he really did everything, for the Jewish people. Later on, behind the scenes, he was active in Soviet Jewry and things like this. It is quite a person. So anyway, Kennedy. Let's put it this way: Kennedy needs money. He goes to Abe Feinberg. He says, you should support me, and all the rest of it. And Feinberg says, well, we'll do it, but what are we getting out of this? You understand? Take a look at the next slide. Right, this is Kennedy talking, and this Charles Bartlett, his friend, and he said, the damnedest meeting in New York, I went to a party, that's a party he set up, and it was given by a group of people who were big money contributors, also Zionists, and they said to me, we know your campaign is in terrible financial shape. The deal they offered was they would finance the campaign. I should let them run the Middle East policy for the next 4 years. And I'm shocked that a lobbyist wants to have what to say in their area of interest. But the bottom line is, in spite of what he said to his friend, he did it. Now, he didn't exactly do it. That's an exaggeration. He didn't say, I'm turning over to Middle East policy over there. But obviously what he says is like this: you guys are going to have access to the White House, right? And you will have a say, certainly in there. And that's what happened. So as a result, Abe Feinberg said, okay, we'll back you. And the bottom line is, he raised the money for him. It's a famous story that if you know the history of the politics, John F. Kennedy ran for president starting in the primaries in early 1960. Does anybody remember the West Virginia primary? That was his first big primary. He was a Catholic, so he had to prove that a Catholic can win in a Protestant state. Otherwise, he has no standing. Once upon a time in old America, one believed that a Catholic could win. And so he ran in West Virginia, and he beat Hubert Humphrey. And he won by like 52, 53%, and all the rest of it. And old man Kennedy came in and bribed everybody. That's what happened. I mean, it's a Dovid. He paid off every sheriff, every local councilor. They came in with suitcases. I mean, that's how it was done. And this is well known. You can go look it up yourself. And it's famous. The reporter said to Kennedy after he won, he said, "Why'd you win? Only by 52%." So he said, "My old man is a tight son of a gun." He said, "He'll pay for a victory, but he won't pay for a landslide." So the bottom line is, where are you going to get the money from? Okay, where do you get the money from? So he got the money from a lot of people. I'm not saying the Jews did it, but a lot of the money came from these Jewish contributors. The election of 1960 was not a dover pushet. Take a look at that. The blue states are the Kennedy states, obviously. I mean, he didn't win a big landslide. To be perfectly honest, if you know, and many of you do, he didn't really even win, right? He won by a total of 100,000 votes, which are the dead people in Chicago. I mean, this is what the... No, I'm serious. Daley, Mayor Daley. Is anybody here? Raise your hands if you remember that story. See, that's what I mean. Yeah. Truman also did the same thing, by the way. It was famous that they said Truman lost among the living, but he swept the cemeteries. You know what I'm saying? Now, in Baltimore, we have honest elections, so we have nothing to talk about. But in other states, the issues are a little bit different. Anyway, so now I come to my point. Eisenhower's gone, but now you deal with the new team. And that, of course, is the team they're going to have to deal with in the 60s. And it's not simple. JFK was like Obama in many ways, I would say, vis-a-vis Israel and the Middle East. They're in great debt to the campaign contributors. I don't think they were passionate on the subject of Israel. They, in general, were pro-Israel. And they realized that in the American political context, you're going to have to say Israel and America have a special relationship. But it wasn't something felt in the kishkas. I don't think Obama does, and I don't think Kennedy did. You understand? I'm serious, as opposed to, say, Truman or something like that. And this is what they had to do. Kennedy was a very cool guy, but he knew that he won partially due to the Jews, and he was loath to alienate them, particularly when he was his father's son. Notice he was laboring under something Obama didn't labor under, which is that he was son of a famous anti-Semite. So he always had to prove that he's not. And he wasn't, by the way. I'm not saying over here, because it's not true, that he secretly was anti-Semitic and just was hiding it. But on the other hand, he did absorb this with the mother's milk, as they say. Now, to give you an example I'm talking about, it's very famous. The morning after the inauguration, on January 21, he called in Mike Feldman, as he called Meyer Feldman, and he said like this. He said, "You're going to have an office near me, and any State Department, CIA cables that go through involving Israel and the Middle East, I want you to look over." And Mike Feldman's like this: "You shouldn't do that to me. I'm Jewish. I'm pro-Israel." He said, "That's why I want you to do it." No, I'm serious. He said, "That's why I want you to do it." And so what he was doing is, when the State Department knows this, and the CIA knows this, and the NSA knows this, then they're going to be careful about what they say vis-a-vis Israel. It's quite a story, but it happened. And this guy Feldman will be his sort of secret ambassador, you might say, to Israel. And when he wants to get, this is something I'm not going to go through great detail this year, but hopefully next year. but when he wants to get politically sensitive messages to Israel that you'd rather not go through the embassy, he used to fly Mike Feldman over there. He would go straight to see Ben-Gurion and Golda Meir or these other people. That's how things were done in the Kennedy administration. In general, I would say that the administration is conflicted, certainly at the level of the government officials, and they're going to be torn over an attitude which is Shani, Israel, a special case, versus the one that says, no, Israel's a regular country, America first, okay? And Dean Rusk, the Secretary of State, with America first. He said, I'm not anti-Semitic because I don't say he was. On the other hand, Israel should get no special treatment whatsoever, versus this guy whose whole Messias, his whole position in the White House is Israel's a special case. So Kennedy ran it this way. He's known to have had a very messy administration in the administrative sense, and because some presidents like that, they like to have contradictory advisors around them. Roosevelt did that also too, in order for them to make the final choice. Kennedy was of this type. And so you had the regular bureaucrats who certainly were not pro-Israel, and they had a lot of Arabists, for example, in the State Department, but they know that one door away is this guy. And that's how Kennedy ran his particular item. Now, Kennedy and the American Jews agree on a liberal domestic agenda. Kennedy was a big liberal, so he came out for civil rights, he came out for labor unions, he came out for all kinds of things along those lines. A very liberal kind of person. And here is the Reform Jews giving him a Sefer Torah. This doesn't have to do with davening mincha. This is Maurice Eisendrath from the head of the Reform Political Action Center. Notice this really has to do more with civil rights in 1962 than with anything else, which the American Jewish community was 150% behind. And so what I'm trying to say is Kennedy felt the same as the American Jews, certainly the liberal Jewish community, which was the overwhelming majority during his administration. But when it comes to Israel, it's not so pashut, because unlike today, in the year 2014, when American Jewry, I'm sorry to say, is conflicted over Israel, half the people that signed these BDS resolutions are Jewish professors, true or not. It is what it is. You have new groups like what do you call it, the J Street, is that what it is? Yeah, and similar things like that. You didn't have that at that time. The American Jewish community was 99%, 98%, not only Israel, pro-Israel stark, the Reform, the conservative, obviously the Orthodox, I mean, strongly, you understand? In fact, in those years, you didn't even need an AIPAC. I mean, the general overwhelming community it was part of the American Jewish religion, let's put it this way. I mean, this is the golden years of that, the late 50s, the early 60s, before the 67 war. There's just nothing to talk about. This is when Exodus came out as a movie. There's just nothing to talk about. The Jews, the Israelis are the good guys, the Arabs are the bad guys, and Gamarno. And so that was the domestic political reality with which Kennedy had to factor. And he knew that he only won because he got this group and this group and this group. He got the black vote, he got the Jewish vote, he got the obviously the Catholic vote and things like that. And he's got to keep these constituencies in line. On the other hand, Kennedy was passionate about nuclear proliferation. That is just something that as a senator he was always into, which is totally understandable. He was a very logical, rational type of guy, at least in his public life, and he was no, I'm serious. And he thought a great deal about some existential type issues. You forget, but we don't have to forget, that today we live in a world in which we consider ourselves past the Cold War. And even though we still have the nukes and the Russians have the nukes, it's very unlikely anybody's going to use it. It could be, Putin, you never know. But it doesn't seem that way, correct? It doesn't seem like America, Russia, and China want to blow each other up because, who will gain? The ISIS, what's the point? But you will recall, perhaps, that in the 50s and especially the 60s, Dr. Strangelove, Fail-Safe, remember all those things? How many of us are old enough to remember that they put in school, as if this is going to help, get under the desk. If the H-bomb hits, you'll be safe, okay? And TA, they took us to the gym underneath the gym below. Okay, be buried in the TA gym. The point is that people really, let me put it this way, the most thoughtful people out there were really preoccupied, and it's not wrong, with what happens if a nuclear war, And so one of the things that's part of that agenda, which is totally understandable, is at least nobody else should get the bomb. It's bad enough with Russia and America, but no, don't get other countries in there. So John F. Kennedy, as a person, really cared about nuclear proliferation. Kristen Herter, who was advised him on the day, notice he had a meeting with the Eisenhower people the day before he became president, And they said you should insist on a number of countries that are very suspicious. Israel and India is at the top. And it's not even expensive anymore. And the U.S. should stop them by insisting on inspections and control, lest Israel develop a bomb. These are the words he used the day before he was sworn in inaugural in 1961. So Kennedy came in with an attitude, with a policy, with an agenda, and all the rest of it. He strongly agreed, and I would say that from the first day of his administration, this was a top priority with him. Now, he never talked about it in public. So for those of us who lived at that time, I was a baby, whatever, you didn't hear about it. But behind the scenes, it was a very big priority for him. It was one of the two sources of continuing behind-the-scenes tension that will characterize United States-Israel relations in the period of 1961 to 63. Okay? There were two big problems America had with Israel. Number one was Dimona and the secret A-bomb. Number two was Kennedy wanted the return of the refugees. People perhaps don't know this, but I'll speak about it later, and maybe more next year, because in 62 came the big pressure. Yes, he wanted Israel to agree on taking back the Palestinians, as they called it, the refugees, as they called it at that time, if not all of them. Then half of them worked out some kind of formula, and Ben-Gurion said, no, 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 no. Okay? So this is as, we forget or didn't know, but everything I'm talking about is not secret. It's probably online. Kennedy was not pashut when it comes to Israel at all. Ben-Gurion's most important American asset, Abe Feinberg, because he had the clout, and he could go in to see Kennedy at any time. And as I said before, Feinberg used the opportunity to get his brother to be a federal judge. He became a very famous federal judge, I'm told, in New York State, a very prominent federal judge. But he also goes in there and he says, Israel needs this, or you're doing this wrong, or all the rest of it. By the way, one of the things he also picks up on the side is he persuades Coca-Cola to set up in Israel, because there was a boycott against Israel. They're afraid of the Arab boycott, and he pressured Coca-Cola to do it, and he got the Coca-Cola concession. Well, he deserved it. Would you agree? I mean, who should get it? You, who should get it? Well, Pepsi was anti-Israel. I don't know if you recall. So it's not an easy issue. That's all I'm trying to say. Now, Kennedy asks officially, I tell you, Kennedy really cared, and so early on in his administration, like in February of 61 already, he sends letters to Israel, is this a nuclear weapons plant? And Ben-Gurion says, I'll speak to you honestly, no. Kennedy doesn't let go. There are letters. Can we send inspectors to verify? Ben-Gurion says, this is an affront to our sovereignty. Do you ask this country if you can? Do you ask the French if you can go there? Do you ask this one if you can go there? When it comes to Israel, then you say you can go there. Kennedy says, listen, we really need to do this. How about April? Ben-Gurion says, it's Pesach. Right? If worse came to worse, he was ready to pull a Lag BaOmer. I see Mrs. Kranz, Yom Kippur Cotton, Anyway. Now, meanwhile, in Israel, right in these first months, Ben-Gurion resigned and ran for office again. Notice, this is when something was happening in Israel, which I'll deal with later, the Lavon affair, where for a variety of reasons, Ben-Gurion had a big victory in 59, and then he resigned, and then they had another election in 61. So he said like this. He says, Ben-Gurion said, now the Israeli system, it works as follows. Ben-Gurion resigned a lot of times. No, it goes like this. You resign, so now you're the acting prime minister with a cabinet until the next elections. So Ben-Gurion says to Kennedy, he says, I'm not even the prime minister, I'm just the acting prime minister. You understand? So how long can you get away with this? And I told you, John F. Kennedy was not like that. He said, well, send him another letter. And so he wouldn't let go. Okay? And basically, he was bugging Israel every week. And then Ben-Gurion realizes that this guy's not going to go away. It's a problem. Finally, in May, they basically say like this. Kennedy says, all right, come May 15th, which I looked up and which was the Shabbos on Erev Shavuos. So I guess nobody will be in Dimona and the factory. And he says, you can send your guys over there on May 15th. In return, Kennedy should meet with Ben-Gurion on May 30th at the White House. Kennedy said like this, he said, let's not tick off the Arabs, let's do it to Waldorf Astoria. This is a time, until 1964, no Israeli prime minister was ever formally welcomed diplomatically to the United States. Ben Gurion would come in every once in a while, and he would go to the White House, and I'm not going to turn him out, to come make a meeting with him, with Truman, with Eisenhower, all the rest of it, but it never was a formal visit invited by the United States government in there, because it was always like this will tick off the Arabs. You get it? This will tick off, it's bad enough we recognized Israel, we'll make do. And really, Ben Gurion had to come up with all kind of tourism, like when you saw the meeting that took place before in 59 between Ben Gurion and Eisenhower, he had to come. He's not going to say, yes, I'm coming and knocking on the door of the White House. So they had to figure out that in Canada, the university will give Ben Gurion an award, and it happened to be in the United States, And the ZO asked me to give a speech in New York. Happened to be in New York, so Washington is nearby. Might as well drop it on my good friend, President Eisenhower. They had to do it that way. It was Johnson was the first one who gave a formal invitation in there, not Kennedy, and said, let's meet in the Waldorf Astoria. So it's kind of informal. And they do. The inspection takes place, as I told you, on Shabbos, May 20th, 1961, in great secrecy. As I said, it was Erev Shavuos, and they said, don't come in and don't talk to the press and all the rest of it. And the Israelis bamboozled them, okay? Rafi Eitan, if you know who that is, not Raphael Eitan, who was the general. There's another guy named Rafi Eitan, who a couple years ago had a political party. He's the guy that captured Eichmann. He was the #1 super sleuth he's the James Bond of the Mossad. So he was tasked by Shimon Peres, he says, figure out some way to bamboozle the Americans. Because they are experts, you understand? They're not stupid, they're sending in technical experts. And so somehow they're pulled the wool over their eyes. And he does. Take a look. This is what he's writing. He says, a bogus control center was built over the real one at Dimona, complete with fake control panels and computer line gauges that gave a credible impression of measuring the output of a reactor engaged in an irrigation scheme to turn the Negev into a lush pasture land. The area containing heavy water, which is the nuclear stuff, was smuggled from France and Norway, was placed off limits to the inspector for safety reasons. The sheer volume of heavy water would have been proof that the reactor was being readied for a very different purpose. There's Rafi Eitan, this young guy, very nondescript. He didn't look like James Bond, but he was, right? But anyway, he did some incredible feats on behalf of the state of Israel. I'm talking about spy-wise. And here's one of them. So they lied, okay? They probably put up what the Russians call a Potemkin village, right? And the inspectors are there, and everything's being run. And the bottom line is that, they had the whole meeting over there. Now, Ben Gurion then says like this. He said, I told you Dimona was harmless, right? When he meets Kennedy 2 weeks later in the Waldorf Astoria, and he says, see, you were bugging me. You went to inspections. You sent guys. There was nothing there. And Kennedy says very sanctimoniously, he says, this visit was necessary. It is not enough for a woman to be virtuous. She must also have the appearance of virtue. Now, to a historian, this is too much, If you don't know who that is, good. If you do know who that is, you'll understand I had to look a long time on the internet to find this picture that I could use. John F. Kennedy is giving a Musar Shmuz to Ben Gurion about the woman must appear to be virtuous. Oh my goodness. Anyway, and you can imagine what Ben Gurion is thinking. He said, Anyhow, Ben Gurion says like this, look, I'll come clean. We need nuclear-powered desalination. We want to turn the Negev into a thing, so we need nuclear power, the uranium and all the rest of it, to power, so not oil, to run the plant that'll take the water from the Mediterranean and turn it into sweet water and all the rest of it. Ben Gurion also didn't feel comfortable just totally lying. At least he didn't on that occasion. And so he says, Kennedy keeps saying, so, but what's really going on? What's really going on? So Ben Gurion said, look, what things will be like in 5 or 10 years, who knows? After all, who knows if the Russians will give the Arabs nuclear weapons? Right now, we're thinking about nuclear-powered desalination. I don't know. You don't know, President Kennedy. I don't know what the world is going to look like in 5, 10 years. Leave it alone. He doesn't want to totally lie. Now, Ben Gurion and Kennedy are coming at the issue from diametrically opposed points of view. Ben-Gurion's attitude was, you've had your inspection, you found nothing bad, now leave us alone. Kennedy is American president. He said like this, no, this is the first of inspections. We need many more inspections at regular intervals. As they would put it today, Kennedy wanted what we call today an inspection regime, okay, like they did with Saddam Hussein. That way, what you failed to detect the first time or second or third will eventually pop up, which is true, correct? In other words, if you want to do it right, you'll do it that way. You keep sending scientists over there, after a while, the truth will come out, which is why the cops repeatedly ask questions during interrogations, don't they? Say it again, tell your story again, tell your story again. Sooner or later, you trip up. Ben-Gurion thought this whole thing will go away. But it was a priority with John F. Kennedy, who was a bulldog on the issue and who politely, confidentially, but explicitly made it clear that if Israel wants American support, Israel would get it, but the relationship had to be a two-way street. And Kennedy meant it. By this time, now 61, Ben-Gurion was committed heart and soul to getting an A-bomb. The formation of the United Arab Republic and similar trends dramatically increased his anxiety. During this year, 1961, is when Nasser is riding high. Ben-Gurion is really afraid they'll have a two-front attack from Egypt and Syria because Nasser was president of both countries, and the other Arabs all getting, because they're all crazy, to get heated up. And what will be? In other words, he wanted an atomic bomb as a last resort, or maybe as a deterrent or something like that. And we need it. And here's Kennedy wants to take it away. And so, if anything, work on Dimona and related projects intensifies. On July 5th, 1961, so that's 2 months or so after the meeting with Thing, Israel launches a rocket, okay, and publicly too. Take a look at this. And they call it, by the way, this is so Israeli, they call it Shavit Bet. Shavit number 2. There wasn't a Shavit 1, but Ben-Gurion said like this, let them all wonder what happened to the first one. This is like the story of Maupassant, he says, where's that breed, the story where the lady's dying and she's having her portrait painted as a big diamond necklace, and the husband says, you don't own a diamond necklace. He said, but your second wife is going to look for it, Right? So this was on Israeli, it's actually British TV, but it's actually, notice they publicize this. Now, why did they publicize something like this? It's election time. They want to show you can only trust Ben-Gurion. We're there when it comes to things. And you can imagine, I know we have people here in the audience who will perhaps remember this. Israel is also like this. It's for Garini, it's all for atomic weapons. Ben-Gurion, And Ben-Gurion, of course, said like this. It's a weather satellite. So, all I can say is that from my father's generation, people are like, Ben-Gurion says it's a weather satellite. Oh, it really means this, They love that sort of thing. And so the truth is, like all clever Jewish maneuvers, it boomeranged. Because what happened was that Nasser freaked out. He said, they're getting a bomb, they're going to shoot missiles at us. So he hooked up with the German scientists and brought them to Egypt to make real missiles. This is something I'll have to deal with next year. Right? To make real, because these, I'm talking about the guys who made the V1 and the V2 for Hitler. So America got some and Russia got some, and he got the leftovers. But the leftovers is also something. And Nasser already starts making speeches in 62, 63. It's 400 miles from Cairo to Tel Aviv. Don't think that you can do it. And Ben-Gurion said like this, it's the same distance from Tel Aviv to Cairo, So each one is up the rhetorical thing, which didn't help anybody. I conclude by pointing out the stage was set for a slowly worsening relationship between Kennedy and Ben-Gurion, which intensified as the Kennedy administration continued in office over the years 1961, 62, and 63. The situation would only get worse with time. Most people don't know this, simply because it's yesterday's history. The situation would only get worse with time, and Ben-Gurion had no way out. Because Kennedy kept saying, we need another inspection, we need this, we have to come clean, and won't let go. Ultimately, it was one of the main factors in the fall of Ben-Gurion from power in June of 63. It's not the only thing, but it's one of the 2 or 3 reasons Ben-Gurion resigned from office permanently in 1963. At that time, in June of 63, the young, 46 years old, Kennedy, handsome American president, looks like he was going to be president until January of 69, right? Kennedy was riding the high, and he was going to win the 64 election. Ben-Gurion, on the other hand, was 77 years old. His increasingly worsening relations with Kennedy plagued him, and it pressured him very powerfully, Ben-Gurion, to resign. Little did he know, let's get the next one. Little did he know that 5 months after his resignation, Kennedy would no longer be alive, and that the new president, Lyndon Johnson, would have an altogether different attitude towards Israel in general and towards Dimona in particular, an attitude with which Ben-Gurion would have felt far more comfortable. I can conclude by saying, and here I'm saying this for next year, in my personal opinion, that's all you ever get over here. But if Ben-Gurion would have known this, he wouldn't have resigned. And in my personal opinion, I think Lyndon Johnson was the most pro-Israel of all the presidents, which is quite a statement. That's quite a statement. And you'll see, not now, not this year, when Johnson came in, he said, I don't want to know. That's what he told him. He said, don't tell me and don't tell anybody else. And when Richard Helms of the CIA was telling us, we have evidence of all this, Johnson said, just shut up, I don't want to know. You understand? Which really means he was saying like this, let Israel get it. Now, if Ben-Gurion, let's put it this way, if Johnson would have won the election in 60, history would be a lot different. But history is what happened, what actually happens and what you have to live with. On that note, I say good night.